Welcome back. Dr. Jose Dotres had spent several decades working in Miami-Dade school system before leaving a year ago to work in Collier County. He's now returning to Miami as the district's new superintendent, replacing Alberto Carvalho. I caught up with him last week and asked him what made him initially want to become a teacher.
Well, it's interesting, Jim. I did not pursue teaching as a career when I entered college. I actually pursued public administration. And then after that, I actually went into the private sector and was actually a field auditor for American Express. But I always had an interest in children and trying to help students. And what I did is I'm a typical, what you could consider a career changer. And so from the private sector, I decided to get into teaching. And the way I did it was applying and acquiring a master's degree in reading, and then acquire all the requirements to become a teacher. I ended up being a first grade teacher. That was my first experience as a teacher with very, very young children. I think in a way, it's one of those things that happen to you and make you a better person. As a result of those young learners, I truly acquired an interest in reading and the struggles that students go through acquiring English even as a second language, reading. And so that kind of drew my interest as a teacher in terms of what I would pay attention to the most when I was instructing and teaching them.
Tell me a little bit about your background. When did you come to Miami?
Sure. So I migrated from Miami, from Cuba. The freedom flights, my parents were part of that process of immigration. And so I arrived in Miami at the age of 5 years old with my mother and my father, and the three of us were non-English speakers. So we arrive, I start school in kindergarten here, Citrus Grove Elementary, began to learn the language. And I actually became the translators for my parents for a very long time until my mother also acquired and began her learning of the language, actually was able to go to school, acquire a GED, and then, pretty much progressed, started as, worked in a factory sewing, because that's what she did in Cuba as well, but ultimately was able to work for immigration at the federal building level. So that's pretty much the story. My father was a baker here. That's what he did his entire time during my childhood and until he retired.
I often say that Miami is one of those communities where the things that are going to affect the rest of the nation often take place first here in Miami, particularly because of the diverse population, the fact that we are a majority foreign-born county. I think that's one of the things that is most intriguing, but also most challenging from an educator standpoint in particular. I would imagine that's one of the challenges that you faced and continue to face, correct?
We have experienced many different situations where we've had to change gears, service a different group of students more intensely. We have the wonderful Haitian community. We have a lot of children that have migrated from different parts of Central America, different countries, different levels of education. We've also had influxes from Puerto Rico and other Caribbean countries. So it is a school district that has to be ready always to have their arms welcoming, open arms, welcoming of the students, yet being very prepared to quickly escalate whatever we need to do to make sure that we are preparing them for the future.
I know one of the things that you've spoken about a lot is addressing the education gap that occurred in part because of the pandemic. The difficulty of students having to now play sort of catch up after 2 years of what we've gone through. Can you sort of explain specifically what that means in terms of how do you do that?
So let's look at both at the academic side and the social emotional side that's tied to mental health. In terms of making sure that we're able to narrow the span of the loss of learning that has occurred or the unfinished business, we have to make sure that we are accelerating a lot of the instruction, but by the same time, balancing, making sure the students that are not catching up and are not being accelerated or are struggling with some instruction, that they receive the appropriate interventions. What does that look like? You have early tutorial programs, after school tutorial programs that truly hone in on the specific strands or specific elements that the students are struggling with or having difficulty with. During the day, there's a lot of things that could be done, strategies that could be applied to make sure that students are keeping up with instruction.
We've seen how politics have entered into the classroom from Tallahassee, from other places. What assurances can you give us that when faced with a choice between doing what is in the best interest of students and teachers and staff, and yet doing what is politically expedient, you will do the right thing when it comes to students, teachers, and staff?
So I can tell you that I worked with Mr. Carvalho for the past 13 years, because I can't count these this time that I've been in Collier. Been watching him in action. I have been very fortunate. My professional development at my later stage of my work was being close to him, looking at his vision, standing next to him. And I too feel very, very strong that you need to do what's right for teachers. You need to do what's right for staff. And I believe you can get the board to work cohesively with you to stand and make sure that is ultimately my responsibility. I've done it as a principal. You know, sometimes folks forget the role of the principal. You have a community, you have to stand ground on what is best for your teachers, for your families, and for your students. I've seen that in him. You have to be sensitive to the community. You have to be respectful of the laws, but I think it's not about only one person, but it's trying to bring unity to the voice on behalf of what is right for kids, what is right for teachers. If I don't have that conviction in me, I would not do this. I've had that conviction in me for the last 30 years since I started working as a teacher.
We'll be right back.